It's no secret that I love my DW735 Thickness Planer. This is the second machine like this I've owned. It's a real workhorse here in the shop, and I don't know how I ever did without one. But one thing that I've never really cared for from the beginning is the short power cord that comes standard with the machine. This is about 6 feet long and really restricts my workflow when I'm working with long material here in the shop. So why don't you join me as I go through the process of upgrading the power feed cord on this machine here at Next Level Carpentry. The standard cord on the DW735 Thickness Planer is wound up on a cord keeper in the back and is about 6 feet long. This is 14 gauge wire, and because I want to extend it out to a more useful length, I'm going to go 12 feet. I want to use a larger gauge wire so that the machine doesn't strain for power and overheat. So I went out and got this awesome 12 gauge cord here. This is by Monster Power, and it's a 25 footer. So I've got plenty of length for doing this upgrade and gaining the ability to be able to park the machine farther away from the outlets in the shop so that I can run longer material through it without tripping over the standard cord or plugging in to a short, heavier gauge cord. Here again, all in an effort to avoid restricting power to the machine, which is hard on the motor and can cause it to overheat and trip out. I'll add an important disclaimer here that I am by no means a licensed electrician, and nobody at DeWALT sanctions or approves this video or its message. I'm a decent mechanic and I'm confident in my abilities to do this. I did speak with a good friend of mine who's a licensed electrician who talked to me about the factors involved in increasing the length of the power cord on a machine like this, and I'm not worried at all about getting the job done or the results. But if your sensibilities or advice advise you that this is not a smart thing to do, then don't do it. Because the power cord enters the back of the machine and is routed internally through it up to the switch in the front, I need to do some disassembly before I can remove the existing cord. So I'll bring the camera in close to show you what that looks like. The first step for exposing the internally routed cord is to remove the top cover from the machine. And even though there's an onboard wrench for removing the 4 screws, I just use a large torque driver in a drill to loosen those 4 screws because it's a lot faster and easier. You can see that the power cord passes behind one of the ears of this cord winder on the back of the machine and then passes through the back of the machine where it's held in place by a cord restraint way down underneath the chain in the corner there. And from there, the cord passes under the dust collection chute where it emerges on the other side, passes through another restrainer over here, and then enters into the back of the housing on the front of the machine, which is directly behind the power switch and the thermal overload. So I've got some more disassembly to do to be able to get at that cord. This dust collection chute is held in place by these 3 long red screws, which are quickly and easily removed so that I can rotate the dust shroud up, pull it out, and then remove it from inside the machine, which exposes the internal routing of the power cord. A Phillips tip and a long driver bit extension makes quick work of removing the plastic cord organizer that routes the cords around the end of the cutter head. I make note that the power cord itself runs underneath the wire between the switch and the motor to keep in mind during reassembly. There's nothing magical about the removal sequence for these various pieces of cord routing hardware, so I'm just going to remove the wind-up ear from the back of the machine next, using a Phillips tip and an impact driver. And this is as good a time as any to point out that the new cord that I'm using to replace the existing one is just slightly larger in diameter, but it'll still fit through the cord routing hardware without undue trouble or restriction. That leaves the little cord restraint inside the back cover as the trickiest piece of cord routing hardware to be removed. Restrictions of the case prevent using a screwdriver to get at those 2 Phillips head screws, and I don't want to remove this entire cover just to get at them. So I'm going to take a radical step into crazy territory and drill a 5/16 access hole in the shroud directly above those 2 Phillips screws so I can slip an Uber Phillips screwdriver down through that hole to remove those 2 screws with comfort in the knowledge that that 5/16 inch hole will never show once the top cover is put back on the machine. And with those 2 screws removed, you can see that the cord slips easily through the rubber grommet in the back cover. And I gotta say that compared to removing the entire outer shroud to get at those 2 little screws,
that was easy.
I've got to dig this hole deeper before I can start filling it in. And I do that by removing 3 screws from the back of the front cover for access to the wiring behind the switch. Because of their position, I make removing these 3 screws easier by using that long bit extension for this as well. It's easy to get the impression that DeWALT doesn't want anybody removing this cover because of the variety of fasteners they use to hold this on. I start with a 4mm hex to remove the gear shift knob, then switch to a tiny Phillips to remove this little plate. Making note that the plate itself and the screws don't hold anything on, but they do hide this Phillips screw back here that's important for removing the front plate. But that's held on with 3mm hex drive screws on the corners here. And with all that stuff removed, you can finally remove the front cover to access the wires from the power cord, which enter the back of the housing here. I clear a little bit of dirt and sawdust out of this housing before using my phone to take a close-up picture of the wiring to use for reference when I'm hooking up the new cord. Because although my memory is really good, it's kind of short. Now, to complete the cordectomy, I just need to remove the 3 power cord wires from their terminals inside this housing. Starting with the 90-degree connector at the tamper switch, followed by the neutral on the back of the on-off switch, and then the screw that holds the ground wire to the body of the machine. Notice that the clever engineers at DeWALT provided a small 5/16 inch access hole through the yellow plastic housing so that I can get at that single screw without removing the whole housing. Seems like a pretty clever idea to me. With the 3 wires disconnected, I'll use this crazy pair of Rube Goldberg needle nose pliers that I just so happen to have on hand to squeeze the cord keeping grommet and release it from the back of this housing. Rube Goldberg strikes again. I snip the solderless connectors off the ends of the wires before pulling the cord out of the machine, both to make it easy on myself while pulling the cord and also to make certain that I completely void the warranty on my DW735 Thickness Planer in the process. Because 2.5 feet of the power cord run through the machine, and I want 12 feet of cord available outside the machine for positioning the planer in the shop, I measure 14.5 feet on my new extension cord and make 2 cuts. The first cut cuts the cord to length, and the second cut voids the warranty on the extension cord as well. As I make this permanent and rather expensive cut, I do a quick mental double check to make sure that I'm measuring from the male end of the cord. It's also a good idea to make sure the cord isn't plugged in when you do that. To get this 12 gauge cord through the 14 gauge hole, I use a sharp utility knife to put a little bevel on the end of the cord to remove the sharp end of the coating, and then give the cord a spritz of silicone. Because, as you well know, if you don't make it easy on yourself, nobody's going to do it for you. Next, I can mark and carefully strip off the outside coating to expose the 3 wires on the last 6 inches of cord. And then trim those exposed wires to lengths that match up to the length on the original cord. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to replicate the terminals exactly when switching from 14 gauge to 12 gauge wire, but these connectors are going to do the job just fine. I have the luxury of a pair of these deluxe wire strippers here, so I can quickly strip the ends of the wires, then slip on and crimp the new connectors in short order. The fact that the new connectors aren't covered in plastic doesn't really make me happy, and I couldn't get a covered flag connector for the 12 gauge wire for this connection. And although that rattles my OCD brain a bit, in reality, this is all going to be just fine. The original cord restraint is going to be a snug fit on this larger diameter cord, but I start by pre-crimping the restraint onto the new cord with a pair of slide lock pliers and finish the installation with my Rube Goldberg needle nose to crimp the connector until I slip it through the hole in the housing. With a little extra pressure and a little perseverance, I slip it on the cord and push it back through the hole in the housing, locking the cord firmly in place, just like it should be. The most important part of these spade connectors is that they fit very snugly on the terminals for a good tight connection that doesn't heat up from arcing. And after a quick double check of my wiring schematic photo, I can slip the front cover back into place and reverse the steps I used for taking this apart earlier. Even though it requires enlarging the slot for the upsize from a 14 gauge ground wire to a 12 gauge ground wire. As I go to reinstall the cover, I realize the error of my ways of leaving too much of the yellow coating sticking through the cord restraint. There's not a whole lot of room inside this housing as it is, and upsizing to the larger, stiffer 12 gauge wire makes it a little tighter still, not allowing me to get away with such a minor infraction. So I have to back up a couple of steps to relocate the cord restraint closer to the end of the cord so that the wires don't pile up on the back of the switch and the thermal protector. But after making that small but necessary adjustment, it takes just a few minutes to reinstall the cover and various accessories to reverse the disassembly process. FYI, I find the little material removal gauge and depth of cut indicator to be more of a rangefinder with a sad degree of accuracy, so I don't spend any time recalibrating or resetting the gauge when I put the cover plate back on. To finish reinstalling the front cover, I drive those 3 screws into the back of the front housing to hold everything in place. Backing out the way I drove in, I position the new power cord on the bottom inside the housing, lay the motor power cord on top of it, and secure them both in place with a little plastic retainer cap so that they stay put during use. And one thing I know for sure is that I'd have a real mess on my hands if those wires ever got caught up in the spinning planer blades. If you've been wondering how I'm going to get this little cord restraint plate screwed back on top of the cord way down in there, well, you're not alone, because I've been wondering too. And what I came up with was reaming out the screwdriver access hole that I drilled earlier to enlarge it from 5/16 to 3/8 of an inch so that the heads of those screws will slip down through that hole along with the screwdriver. This way I can use my Rube Goldberg pliers to place the little restraint plate on top of the cord, and with a bit of luck slip the screw and the screwdriver down through the hole and carefully start the screw in the threaded hole in the body of the machine. And if you want to know how I got the screw to stick on the tip of that long screwdriver, well, that's another MacGyver trick that I've learned, and it involves a little bit of my favorite Starbond CA glue. I start by spritzing the tip of the long screwdriver with Starbond accelerator, and then I add a drop of Starbond medium CA glue into the head of the screw before pressing the screw onto the tip of the screwdriver for 10 seconds as the CA glue cures. Once stuck, I can maneuver the screwdriver and the screw down through the little hole in the retainer plate, and with a bit of luck get the screw started in that threaded hole. The Starbond sticks just enough to hold the screw in place as long as it needs to, but then pops off the tip of the screwdriver with just a little flick of a thumbnail. So I can finish tightening the screws to hold the cord firmly in place. Yeah, you go right ahead. I'll take care of this for you. No problem. Wow, thanks. Yeah, that'd be great. If you want to handle that for us, then I can ask the viewers if they consider subscribing to Next Level Carpentry if you haven't already. It's free, you know, and as a subscriber, you'll be first to be notified when a new video like this gets uploaded to the channel. And while you're at it, if you like this sort of video content, hit the thumbs up button so that the quants at YouTube know that there's stuff happening here at Next Level Carpentry. As long as Chip's working and I'm talking, I'll mention that, as always, there's links in the video's description to tools and supplies you see in use in this video and for the other machines and stuff you see around the shop. And as an influencer for those suppliers, Next Level Carpentry gets paid small ad fees that help support video production here on the channel. And I always appreciate that. There's also links in the video description to Spring for t-shirts and swag like you see here around the shop. And for those who like the type of content you see here at Next Level Carpentry, I try to minimize the hype and bring you in-depth content like this that's maybe not so mainstream as a lot of the other stuff out there on YouTube. And if that's the sort of content you're looking for, there's a link in the video description to Patreon where you can become a patron of Next Level Carpentry. And as a reward for going above and beyond to support the channel, you'll have access to a growing library of patron-only videos there at Patreon, where you get behind the scenes, more in-depth stuff than I normally produce for the wider audience of YouTube. And it's a great thing to connect with patrons on a different level and on a wider range of topics than show up in YouTube comments in general. But with Chip wrapped up over there, I'm going to get ready to give this baby a test drive so that I can put the planer back to use here in the shop with a little less frustration over the short cord that came on that planer. Yeah, for sure, no problem. Should be all ready to go and good for a test ride, but don't call me if something doesn't work in here, all right? So yeah, thanks again, Chip, and I'll be sure to give it a test run. And unless you've unblocked my number, don't worry about me calling if sparks fly when I plug this thing in. Well, there it is then. The upgrade from a short 14 gauge cord to a long heavy-duty 12 gauge cord is complete. So now I can position the planer pretty much anywhere I want in the shop and have plenty of power and less frustration in working with it because I'm not restrained by that short cord. And with the 12 gauge cord, I don't have to worry about overheating the motor at all because of the longer length. So I think this is as good a time as any to fire up the thickness planer and see if we get success or sparks. Fire in the hole. Well, I think that qualifies as a success. So, as always, and until next time, thanks for watching. I kind of thought there might be a few viewers left here at the end of the end of the end. And to reward you for your persistence, I thought I'd add a couple things here. And the first one is that at some point I'll probably make bigger ears for this cord wind-up back here. Obviously the fatter cord that's longer isn't going to work on here very well. But in the meantime, I just wrap the cord around the outfeed table and that'll work fine for parking it against the wall over here where I store it. The other thing I'll talk about a little bit is the cart that you see here for the planer. This is something I just designed and made in the shop, and I actually made it for my last DeWALT planer, well, 2 planers ago, and that was more the lunchbox style planer that's narrower in profile. It fit a little differently on the stand, but when I upgraded to the DW735, I was able to just bolt the planer on that older stand. But if I was to start over again, I'd make the stand a little wider so it fit better. But this works great, and I like it a whole lot better than some universal aftermarket mobile base, just because it's really compact and it's solid. I also added this handle here. It's just 2 pieces of pipe that sleeve together. That gives me more leverage for lifting and moving the heavy planer, and then it just slides out of the way when not in use, which is a convenient feature for the planer to have. And I really like that for functionality here in the shop. And if anybody's interested, I can put a couple of close-up photos of that stand on Pinterest in case you're thinking about building or designing and building a stand like that. The last thing I'll mention is what happened to the other end of this extension cord. Well, long story short, I did the natural thing and put a new high-quality Hubbell male end on the cord so that I can take advantage of the cord's interlocking plug feature and use it on the rare occasions when the nearest outlet is still far away. And this way I'm assured to get plenty of power to the planer. Plus, I get to take advantage of the interlocking plug features that came on the cord, plus the lighted end that shows me I've got power when I need it. So I don't have to put up with the extra long cord on the planer all the time, but my bases are covered for the rare occasion when the outlet's farther away than this new upgraded cord allows for. So there you have it, behind the scenes, end of the end information about the DW735 Thickness Planer power cord upgrade. And until next time, at the end of the end of the end, thanks for watching.